The Coalition has joined the Greens in rejecting Labor's cap on international students to curb net migration. Joining me live is Shadow Assistant Foreign Affairs Minister Claire Chandler. Claire, thanks for coming on the program. Good to see you. So the Coalition has done a backflip, choosing not to support the government to place caps on international student numbers. Are you doing a Greens by saying it's not exactly what we want, so we're going to vote it down?
Oh, look, Kenny, thank you very much for having me on the show this morning, and good to see you and your viewers. This is absolutely not a deal by any means, and I don't want to foreshadow what might be discussed in Liberal Party room later on this morning, but when we, as an opposition, look carefully at legislation, we make a determination of whether or not it's achieving the desired outcomes. And I think there has been plenty of commentary out in the community since the government introduced its student cap plan about whether or not it was actually achieving the desired outcome. So we're going through the process of looking at that legislation very carefully, as I'm sure are our colleagues in the Greens, but it's certainly not the Coalition teaming up with the Greens by any means. We look at every piece of legislation on its merits and we make a considered decision. Well, you have sided with the Greens on this particular immigration bill. Will this affect Peter Duttons' tough on immigration credibility ahead of the election? I absolutely don't think that's the case, Kenny. I think that the Labor government has unfortunately done a very poor job in and of itself managing our borders and keeping our community safe. And Australians can see that very plainly and very clearly. When they're contacting my office, those are the concerns that they're raising with me, that the Labor government has frankly let them down when it comes to national security, when it comes to the borders, and quite frankly, when it comes to the economy more broadly and ensuring that Australians actually feel confident in the future of our country, which frankly I don't think they do at the moment. Universities are crying out for clarity. There's now the possibility that students seeking to study in Australia will now be assessed under the current system, Ministerial Direction 107, which directs immigration officials to prioritise visas for students from countries like China who are considered low risk of dropping out. Is that ideal? Well, look, I will leave it up to our Shadow Education Minister, Sarah Henderson, to address those quite specific issues. But certainly I've been aware that the university sector is lacking certainty in this regard. And we do have to consider the fact more broadly and holistically of how reliant our university sector is on international students and what is the best way to tackle that reliance. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and China's President Xi Jinping met last night in Rio de Janeiro. President Xi told Mr Albanese China-Australia relations are on a trajectory that has many inspirations to offer. What's your reaction to their meeting last night? Well, look, I think unfortunately Mr Albanese has a habit of approaching these sorts of dialogues in a way that he is somewhat hesitant to raise the serious concerns about the relationship. And that's frankly why you've seen so many Chinese media reports saying that more world leaders should be emulating Mr Albanese's style. And I've seen it backgrounded in the media today that Mr Albanese will be addressing the G20 today on the invasion of Ukraine and condemning Russia and North Korea for their role in that. The reality is, last night he stood side by side with a man, the Chinese president, who is supporting North Korea and Russia in the invasion of Ukraine. So I think it's incredibly disappointing that he seemingly had the opportunity to raise these issues with President Xi face to face, and from the sounds of the readout of that meeting, didn't do so. So with the incoming Trump presidency, do you think that the government is striking the right balance between China and the US? Well, look, I think there's a fair bit of scrambling within the Albanese government since Trump's successful election to make sure that everything is in place to continue that bilateral relationship. And I know there's been a lot of commentary about the fact that Ambassador Rudd is currently in DC and whether he is the right person to be managing that relationship, given some of his commentary about President Trump. So we will be looking very carefully to see how the government balances these relationships going into the future. And will that involve looking at Mr Rudd's position? I think I've made my personal view quite clear there. I think there are questions to be asked about whether Mr Rudd is the right person to be the ambassador to the United States in the future, particularly given what he has said about President Trump previously. And speaking frankly, I think it was somewhat short-sighted by the government to put Mr Rudd into that role when there was always a prospect that President Trump was going to seek re-election. Claire Chandler, appreciate you coming on the program and your time this morning. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Thanks very much, Kenny.